Welcome to Codex, a history of video games. I'm Mike Coletta.
And I am Tyler Osby.
And today I am so excited because I didn't know what we were going to talk about going into this episode today. And we're talking about
a surprise.
Cheat devices. It feels good being surprised as a host. I'm excited about it.
I'm excited to talk about cheat devices. Did you have any cheat devices growing up?
So I was always the kid whose buddy had a GameShark for 64 that I had to borrow, and it was weird trying to operate it, and we'd like put different games in because back then you didn't know if the game you owned had a cheat code for it. You had to like put it in and just find out, you know?
Yeah.
And we had a lot of fun doing that. That was a really fun time.
Yeah, I had a Game Genie for Super Nintendo because a buddy of mine that lived up the street had one, and it was very cool. And I also had a Game Genie for my original Game Boy, which was also very cool.
So you're one of the OG cheaters, as we say.
That's right. I never got anything beyond that. I didn't get too deep into that scene, but the Super Nintendo one and the Game Boy one were what I had. So
I know this is kind of a quick question, opinion question. Are you partial to either this method, or do you like it when games have cheats?
I mean, I think I prefer it when games have cheats. Like, you mean like the infinite ammo, infinite lives style of cheats? I
like it when they're just built in, essentially, is what I'm saying. Like, I like it. Oh,
yeah, definitely.
Because
you could get some weirdness to happen because these things were literally modifying memory as the game ran. So there you could get a lot of weirdness with things by using a Game Genie, whereas if it was built in, then
are we going to talk about? So we're going to talk about how they work today, right? Because I have no idea.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay,
yeah, well, we'll get into it.
I'm going to let you go then. I'm so excited. Here we go.
Yeah. So normally on the show, we talk about software. We talk about games because, it's got to have games. Hardware enables games, but it's all about the games. We don't just sit here and use hardware without any software for it, right? But occasionally we do talk about hardware. We talked about the Apple Pippin in a few weeks back. We haven't covered a whole lot of other kinds of hardware very often, though. But this week, I want to change that a little bit and cover these things that have sort of been lost to time, I think, but many of us have fond memories of them. And we're talking, of course, about cheating devices. So let's talk about what a cheat device is, or at least what it is for the purposes of this episode, because there are a lot of things you could consider a cheat device. I think those like mouse and keyboard adapters for consoles could probably be considered a cheat device by some people.
What about a turbo button? That's a cheat device. Right?
Yeah, or like a slow-mo button or something. Yeah, and a lot of these cheat devices that we're going to talk about have that kind of stuff built into them. But maybe like a macro button on a controller or something like that. That's what you're talking about when you say turbo button?
Yeah, like also, I mean, those new SCUF controllers, the Call of Duty ones that people use, and everyone's like, they're probably using a SCUF controller. They get really upset. I don't know what they are because I'm a really good video game historian, so...
Yeah, well, hey, if you're mad at the hardware, you're probably bad at the game.
That's true.
But
if you're mad, you're bad. That's our new slogan. We should get t-shirts made.
Mad because you're bad?
Yeah.
So anyway, for the purposes of this episode, a cheat device is a hardware device that can be used in conjunction with a gaming system to modify the game in question. Oftentimes, this takes the form of an intermediate cartridge that plugs into the game system, and then the game you want to play is plugged into that cartridge. Kind of like I will call that the Tower of Power way of doing this, I guess. Many consoles had cheat devices that did this.
I think that should be the official term. I'm going to say it right here, right now.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of the Sega, the infamous JPEG of like the Sega Tower of Power that's got like a Game Genie, a power-based converter, Sonic and Knuckles, which actually kind of functions similar to some of these cheat devices. And it's got like a bunch of other things like piled on top of it. And it's just like this really tall thing sticking out on top of a Sega Genesis. This would fit perfectly into a Tower of Power.
If you wanted to cheat and you had your console in like a closed entertainment cabinet, bad luck. You got to pull that thing out. You can't do the Tower of Power.
You're going to have a bad time, big dog. These towers of power are hilarious, yes, and they can cause damage to your system if you're not careful. There's one instance of this, and we'll get into it when we get there. But basically, for as long as games have been around, cheating has also been around. And I don't just mean video games. This goes back thousands of years, right? As long as people have been playing games or abiding by some sort of rules, there are people who didn't want to abide by those rules. Sometimes it's fun. Sometimes they're breaking the law and doing the wrong thing and going to jail for it. Luckily, cheating at video games is not illegal yet. There are a lot of different ways. Yeah, there are a lot of different ways to cheat at video games. For this episode, we're not talking about the cheats that are built into many games like what you were talking about, especially a lot of older games used to have cheat codes built in. That could be fun to get into, I think, someday, the history of cheat codes.
But yeah, I love cheat codes. Who doesn't love a good cheat code?
Oh, man, cheat codes are great. But today we're talking about devices that were definitely not intended for use by the game developer. And not all developers were okay with the idea of cheat devices. In fact, Nintendo would challenge their legality, which is something we'll go into as well. We talked about that way back when we were covering the Ultimate History of Video Games, Volume 1, but I think it's worth talking about again for newer listeners.
Oh, yeah, we don't expect you to go all the way back there, And if we do, we'll tell you to.
Right. So let's talk about how most cheat devices work before we get into specific devices. Most cheat devices work generally in a similar way. They modify the system's memory as a game is running to change behavior of the game. Sometimes this is RAM on a computer, but on consoles, like with cartridges, a lot of times they're modifying the ROM on the cartridge. They're not physically changing what's on the cartridge, but they are intercepting it as it comes into the console and like giving a different value for what the console is requesting, basically. Usually this was for granting things like unlimited lives, invulnerability, unlimited ammo, things like that. It was not for like adding content to a game or creating mods in that sense. Sometimes you could unlock content that was in a game that was hidden away for whatever reason. Thinking of like the hot coffee mod for Grand Theft Auto in the PlayStation 2 days. You could get to that with an action replay code. The action replay was not creating that content. It was just unlocking what was already on the disc, basically. In the early computer days, it was possible to modify RAM values without specialized devices, though it was pretty difficult to figure out which areas of RAM you wanted to modify if you didn't have the original source code for the game. The Commodore 64, the ZX Spectrum, and the Amstrad CPC computers all utilized poke statements, which is like a command you can give the computer, as I understand it, and that you could modify the RAM of a game either while it's going on or before launching it. And this worked pretty well, but like I said, it was kind of hard to figure out exactly which memory addresses to poke to receive the results you're looking for. And if you weren't careful, you'd cause bugs or you just cause the game to crash.
I was so concerned as a kid that this would break my system. Like my friend would like plug his GameShark, because he would just come visit us in Anchorage, Alaska, and he would bring his GameShark down. And he would just bring the GameShark only because we had the same games. And he's like, we're going to do this. And I'm like, is it going to break my 64? Like, I was just so nervous because I thought I felt bad. Like, as a kid, you're like, I'm a bad boy, One of the original bad boys of gaming.
Nintendo would be mad at you for it, too.
They would be mad. They would ruin my childhood, Nintendo, if they'd have found out.
And if you ask Tim Nintendo, is this going to break my system? You know what Tim Nintendo would say? He would probably say something like, we can't really guarantee that it's going to be okay. So, it might break your system.
Tim Nintendo would do the technological version of we're not mad, just disappointed in you, essentially.
Yeah, and if they said that to me, if I had known that, I would have not done it at all. There's no way I was putting my beloved system at risk here, but I did. So yeah, those types of cheats for poking memory addresses on older computers, you could find them in early gaming magazines because they didn't require any extra hardware to accomplish. Life was really good back then, but it could be better. Enter cheating devices. So before we get to devices that were marketed as cheat devices, I want to touch on the first device that Wikipedia talks about, which is sort of a predecessor to a purpose-built focused cheat device. And this was called the Multiface. And it's not the first of its kind, but it was kind of the first one to sort of blow up and sort of get a following.
It's got a cool name.
It does, yeah. And it makes sense, I think. We'll when we can talk about if that name makes sense after I tell you how it works. So the Multiface was a device released for the ZX Spectrum, the Amstrad CPC, and the Atari ST personal computers. The actual purpose of the device wasn't for cheating. It was to dump the contents of the computer's memory to an external storage device, usually a tape or another kind of disk drive, depending on what your hardware setup was. You could also load this memory dump back into RAM and continue exactly where you left off in the program. This had a lot of legitimate uses, like debugging software or saving your place in a game. Lots of games in this era didn't have any sort of save function, or if they did, it might be kind of limited. This basically allowed you to do what people do in emulators now, which is take a save state and return to that program literally exactly where you left off. So these could be used to sort of save your progress in a game. It did have some less legitimate uses too, because at the time, most games would just load entirely into RAM. So that meant that a save state could be reloaded on any machine, and it would be the entire game, and it would basically let people pirate games. This got a lot... Yeah. And it would get by any sort of copy protection because once the game was loaded, you just take a snapshot of that of the RAM at that point in time, and then just load it up on any old other computer, and you're already past the copy protection.
So just to be clear, because I'm just so in case anyone's confused, I'm confused what I'm trying to say. But so when you load, say, let's go with Jaybird, our classic favorite one, and we don't know if this is true, but in this situation, if I loaded Jaybird, when I get to the main menu of Jaybird, all of the game is already loaded into RAM.
Yeah.
So that save state would be, I'm at the main menu, but I could play any part of the game at that point.
Right.
That seems like a major flaw to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but at the time, games were small, and they could be loaded fully into RAM, and like being able to develop your program in a way that only parts of it were loaded into RAM and some were pulled off disks, like that was kind of, if you didn't need to do that, why would you do it? It's kind of a extra steps, and could introduce bugs and things like that. So when games didn't need to do it, they didn't do it. Especially when this wasn't, they didn't foresee this coming when they were making these games. They weren't like, we're going to got here, And anyway, eventually as games got bigger and more complex and they didn't store every piece of themselves in RAM at all times, these save state things became a lot less useful because you could still do it. You could still take a save state and load it back up, but you still needed the disk and the drive to do anything with it or to get beyond where you were at that point in time. It basically, as soon as the game needed to read from the disk again, if you didn't have it, you were going to have a bad time. So the piracy uses for this hardware was fairly limited after a while.
Well, that's good. So maybe that's why they weren't worried about it as much. I just was like, if you're loading the whole game in, you're like giving it away. You're just putting it in RAM.
Yeah, well, you're assuming that the person loading it into RAM bought it legitimately, and I don't know. It's one of those things you just didn't really foresee,
That's nice that the people that we were designing software for the ZX Spectrum trusted their consumers. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I go as far. I think they just weren't even thinking about it. Like, it just didn't even occur to them that this could happen. In
reading like things about Xbox modding, the one thing I'm learning is Microsoft thinks they've thought of everything, and then someone finds a new way, like a disk drive, to completely pirate and hack their system. So
yeah, yep, yeah. So there were ways to restore save states without these devices too, for some systems. So you wouldn't even need the Multiface if you had a save state on a tape or something. You could just load it up, which really contributed to their use as piracy devices. So. You didn't even need to own this thing to be able to use a pirated game from it, which is kind of a bummer.
Yeah.
But this type of device existed for a lot of different systems, and it's the origin of a cheat device many of you have heard of, the Action Replay, which is made by a company called Datel. Then that name, Action Replay, makes a lot more sense when you think of it as a game-saving device or a save state device rather than a cheating device. They still call them Action Replay. Well, I don't make them anymore, I don't think. But even the most recent cheat devices were called Action Replays, which is a name that made no sense for what it was. But
not
back in the day,
nearly as cool as GameShark.
Not nearly as cool. Yeah. But Action Replay, the name made sense when it was a save state device. But eventually, though, people figured out that this kind of device was super useful, not only for dumping the memory in the computer, but also just changing it in place. So this is how these hardware cheating devices came about. The Action Replay was originally made for the Commodore 64, and then later the Amiga, which would also be a very fun old computer system to cover someday, I think.
Yeah, I think we barely touched on the Amiga, if at all, during our initial Ultimate History video games time. So it'd be neat to go back and talk about it for sure.
Yeah, it's a pretty niche operating system and computer system in the Wild West of PCs in the 80s. It was graphical, though. It was like kind of around the same time as the Mac. So it was like an alternative graphical system to the Mac or Windows in the 80s, which was kind of cool.
If there's one thing we love talking about on this podcast, it's the Wild West of 80s PC gaming.
That's right. So these Action Replay devices were pretty cool, but they were a fairly niche product in the already fairly niche PC gaming community. I know PC gaming was a lot bigger outside of the US, but I think it was still fairly small. However, in 1990, we would see the release of the Game Genie, which was a device for the NES that was specifically designed and marketed as a cheating device, although they called it a video game enhancer. Which, okay.
Just like performance enhancement. It's the same kind of thing. You're not cheating.
Yeah,
You're
except
just
it
taking
worked.
a performance enhancing drug. You're fine.
Yeah. So it was made by Codemasters, who are still around today. They make the Dirt series of games. Like they were a game developer back then who also did some hardware stuff on the side. Eventually they got tired of the hardware stuff, and now they make racing games. So that's cool.
That's cool. They're still kicking. That's great.
Yeah. Originally, the Game Genie began its life as a physical knob attached to a game called Treasure Island Dizzy, which was a game made by Codemasters. The idea was that people would turn this knob physically on the cartridge to adjust the number of lives they had, which is like kind of cool, and it basically would modify the game's memory as before you turned it on, or maybe even while you were running. I honestly don't know how it worked. It didn't pan out. They never actually released that cartridge, but the idea was pretty cool, and so Codemasters developed the Game Genie. They loved doing this stuff. They were kind of famous for doing weird hardware stuff, like including controller ports on their Genesis games, like Micro Machines 96 and Pete Sampras Tennis, so that you could have more than just two controllers on the Genesis. You would literally plug a controller straight into the cartridge of Micro Machines to play more than two players.
That's really, really cool, actually.
Yeah.
That's really neat they were doing that.
Yeah, I like that. It's a cool way to take advantage of some of the upsides of cartridge technology. You know, I back in the day when it was about cartridges versus discs, like discs definitely could hold a lot more, but you couldn't do this with a disc. You couldn't add controller ports to your game, or a lot of Super Nintendo games had like the Super FX chip. You wouldn't have been able to do that on a PlayStation, like just straight up add hardware to be able to use like you could do on Super Nintendo.
Well, I think the only way you could even access the game on a PlayStation would be like the memory card slot, right? That's the only way you could do something like this, isn't it?
Yeah, and the memory card slot would not be fast enough to like add hardware to your system in a way that could be usable to speed up a game or something. But anyway, the I think in the end the huge capacity of discs won out over the cartridge advantages, but cartridges did have some advantages. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk on some of the advantages of cartridges. Back to the Game Genie, which was very successful commercially, and Codemasters released versions for the Sega Genesis and Game Boy in those early years. Part of this success was due to just how user-friendly these devices were. Instead of needing to know exact memory addresses and values like you needed to with those poke commands and some of the action replay stuff on older machines, on PCs, the Game Genie would encode these values into much smaller strings that could be more easily shared. So like the actual code was kind of an obfuscated version of what was actually happening behind the scenes, and it made it so you could just share them pretty easily with your friends and stuff like that. It also made it very easy or very difficult to figure out codes on your own because you didn't have any. They weren't random, but they were sort of like you didn't get any information about the code in what was being put into the game. Basically, what you were typing in didn't really. There was no way for you to know what it was doing other than what somebody was telling you it was doing. Do you want to hear about how Game Genie worked?
I do. I'm loving the tech specs of this stuff, and it's interesting. I find it very interesting.
So here's how the Game Genie worked. The Game Genie was inserted into the console. We're talking NES here. And then the game cartridge that the player wanted to play was inserted into the Game Genie. You didn't push the cartridge down inside the NES because you had this like game cartridge sticking out of it, basically. It was just like way out. Yeah.
Do you or do you not blow on the Game Genie if you're putting it in the console?
You do. You have to blow on both sides of it too. So you are adding two more surfaces to blow on if your game's not working.
That's right. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. When the player started up the console, instead of being greeted by the game they'd inserted, they were greeted by a screen to type in codes. Different consoles had different formats for their codes, but they were all sort of human readable, just letters and numbers, and they weren't very long, which made them more easily shareable in magazines and code books that Codemasters and Galoob, which was the manufacturer of the Genie, this is the same Galoob that made toys and stuff. Like, I think they made Stretch Armstrong. Do you remember Stretch Armstrong?
Yeah. Oh, I remember Stretch Armstrong. Yeah.
So Galoob made that. And they would include a book with a device. And I had two books for my Super Nintendo one. One of them was much bigger than the other. And then they'd sell updated versions of it too, because as new games would come out, the Game Genie would still work for them, but people didn't know what the codes were. And the cartridge didn't have any codes built into it. So you just had to open up the book, find your game, and like look up the code in there, which was like kind of fun.
No, that's really fun.
It was fun to look at other games in the book and see like, oh man, if I had Super Mario World 2, I could do this thing and that. Actually, Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, I don't think worked with the Game Genie.
I don't think I ever, I'm going to say it right now, I don't think I ever felt cooler than when I was a kid and I was messing with like a Game Genie or a GameShark, because you feel like you feel bad, you're like breaking the rules, but it's not really, but you feel like it, which is cool.
Yeah, and Nintendo was so mad about it.
I got so mad,
which just made it even better, So yeah, the Game Boy and Game Gear versions of the Game Genie actually had a little slot on the back of them with they would like open up, and they would keep a little tiny booklet of codes, like really, really small. So you would always have your code book with you when you were taking your games on the go. And it included stickers of some of the most popular codes that could be stuck to the back of the cartridge, which would make it really easy to read codes right off the cartridge as you were typing them in, because the way the games fit into the Game Genie on both the Game Gear and the Game Boy, you didn't see the front of the cartridge, you saw the back of the cartridge. So you could just stick one of these stickers on there, look at the back of the cartridge, type in your codes, and be ready to go. I wish I still knew the codes, but there was a period of time in my life where you could enter 3 codes into a Game Boy Game Genie. And I had all 3 of the codes that I wanted memorized for Super Mario Land. And I think they were for Infinite Lives, the being able to run through walls. And there was one other one. Maybe it was be invulnerable all the time. I think it was just always had star power. And so that's how I beat that game originally. And I was very proud of myself for having beat it. But looking back, I shouldn't have been.
Those codes have to be on the internet, though, right? If they're the same codes, right? They got to be.
Oh yeah, they're for sure on the internet somewhere. But I had them memorized at one point. Like I could just rip through typing them in, because you had to do it every time you turn the Game Genie on, or every time you turn the Game Boy on. So I just would rip through them, typing them in. But yeah, so over 5 million Game Genies were sold over the course of its life across the NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, Game Gear, Sega Genesis. So it was super popular. But the Game Genie had a bit of a legal problem. Nintendo, in classic Nintendo fashion, didn't like that the Game Genie was modifying the code of their games. They didn't like that people were using them to play games in ways that they didn't intend. So they sued Galoob, which I guess somebody had to try it. In court, they argued that because the Game Genie was modifying the code of their games, it was creating a derivative work, and thus it was a violation of copyright law. They did get them to stop selling Game Genies temporarily in the U.S., but not Canada. There is an ad with a Game Genie ad that ran in Canada where it said, "Thank you, Canada," for like not stopping the sales of Game Genies or something in Canada. But in the end, though, courts threw it out, saying Nintendo was just being big babies about all of this, because people still had to buy the game from Nintendo. Who cares if it's being modified? They're not able to like share this modification with people who don't have the game. So ultimately, it's not costing Nintendo anything. Nintendo did try to put methods in newer games to stop Game Genies from working, but usually they were pretty easily bypassed. A lot of games at the time would have what you'd have to put in called a master code, and that would sort of bypass whatever checks the game was doing to see if it was being modified. And that was kind of how you got around that, which worked, except for it took up one of your code slots, which is kind of a bummer.
Well, I'm thinking about it, like, this is actually good that they ended up winning this lawsuit, because I feel like Nintendo could have used this as an excuse to, like, not let any third-party peripherals be sold.
Yeah.
Which is good, because, like, back then, like, we all made fun of, like, Nyko and all those companies. They weren't very good. But now there's a cool thing going on where there are a lot of retro game fans that are making their own like controllers that are really cool, looking really good. Like there's a controller for the N64 that just makes it so great. It looks like a Switch Pro controller essentially, but it's for the 64, and you can buy it for like $40 or $50 on Amazon. And I really want one because I'm like this, because you forget like this old 64 controller. It's kind of rough. It's hard to play with, especially now.
Yeah.
And it's just, you think about it, you're like, oh, this is actually really cool that they fixed this. And if they lost this lawsuit, back then, it could have been an excuse for them to not even let that stuff happen now.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah. Now, would we have a lot less random Wii sports supplies in the dumpster and landfills across the country? Yes, which might be a good thing. But for the good stuff, it's important.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is one of those like precedent cases, right, where it seems like a simple open and shut, and it kind of was, but similar to when Sony lost their lawsuit against Cdx over the Bleem emulator on PC and Dreamcast, it sort of was like, okay, these cheating devices are legal, so there were a lot more that were able to be made because maybe there were companies that wanted to get into it but weren't really sure if it was legal, and they didn't want to spin up a whole thing in case it was going to get banned. Which is what happened with emulators. Like once emulators were like de facto, like they are legal, like the courts have said they are legal, then it became like, oh, great, now emulators exist for almost everything, which I think is a good thing is in terms of video game preservation and things like that.
Me too. Very pro.
Big fan. Galoob did offer Nintendo the option to make the Game Genie an officially licensed product, but they turned it down. However, Sega, being Sega at the time, they loved the Game Genie and they gave it their official seal of approval, which helped it sell even more. And I think it was a good brand move to differentiate themselves from Nintendo, because at the time, this was in like 1990, Nintendo was still kicking their butt a little bit. We're talking Genesis versus NES, and the NES was selling like hotcakes and gangbusters. The Genesis was doing pretty well too, and the Super Nintendo was just around the corner. But Sega got a lot of their brand identity in the late 80s and early 90s was being the anti-Nintendo. Nintendo was this like family-friendly, games for kids kind of thing, and Sega said, no, we are the adult, the mature, your like 15-year-old older brother is into Mortal Kombat, and so we're cooler than Nintendo. And so they were like, yes, cheating is fun and cool. We're going to officially license the Game Genie. So that was kind of cool, I thought.
Definitely. Sonic, total bad boy. Smoking cigarettes, wearing leather jackets, you know.
That's right. They did restrict the Game Genie from working with games that had a save feature, I guess to like preserve the integrity of some of their longer games like Phantasy Star or Shining Force. It's kind of an odd choice to me, but I guess it's one Galoob thought was worth it to get that official seal of approval. I'd probably take that deal too if I were Galoob.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really cool that Sega was like, yeah, we're fine with it.
Yeah. And then they even officially endorsed it, which is very cool. The Game Genie would die with the Super Nintendo Genesis generation of gaming. But they did almost complete a Game Genie 2 for the Super Nintendo, which would have enabled a lot of extra features, like allowing players to develop their own codes, activating individual codes with a controller button combo, so you could like turn them off and on while you were playing, or even allow people to play games in like a slow motion mode. Ultimately, though, they decided not to release it, and this is because Galoob became under new management, which didn't really understand video games and why the Game Genie was a product worth keeping around. So they sort of shut all of that stuff down. We could have had a Game Genie for the Nintendo 64 and beyond, but we didn't because Galoob was like, what is this video game stuff? We don't like it. We're going to stop making video game stuff. So,
and we might never have had a GameShark if there was a Game Genie still around.
Yeah. Rest in peace, Game Genie 2.
We'll miss you, Game Genie 2.
Yeah. The copyright for the Game Genie name expired in 2010, but was picked up by Hyperkin, which is a company famous for making modern clone consoles of older systems, and they make a lot of controllers. That controller you were talking about might actually be made by Hyperkin. Wouldn't be surprised.
I think the one I was talking about, I don't know the name of it because I'm really bad at remembering things, but it actually was kickstarted, which is pretty cool.
Oh, cool.
You know what? I'll look it up. You keep going.
Okay. So they've released some more Game Genie products, Hyperkin has, but they're more save game editors than memory-altering cheating devices like older Game Genie. That style of game modification doesn't really work with games these days for a lot of reasons, which we'll touch on later, but mostly being that they're locked out. Like, companies won't let them work, and games are so complex nowadays that just changing a couple spots in memory is like not enough to make anything neat happen. So that's a bummer. But in the 5th console generation, we get Mike's favorite, the GameShark.
Yeah.
So with the Game Genie brand being put to bed after the 4th generation of game consoles, there was a gap to be filled. The Nintendo 64 and PlayStation generation needed cheat devices, and the GameShark by Interact fit the bill. The GameShark was basically a rebranded version of Dattel's Action Replay, because Dattel kept putting out Action Replay stuff in Europe and the UK during this whole time. And so Interact took the Action Replay brand and hardware and just called it GameShark, basically, for the rest of basically every GameShark was more or less an Action Replay. For the N64, the GameShark worked similarly to how the Game Genie worked. You inserted a cartridge in between the console and the game you wanted to play. You type in codes that were found on the internet, or for the first time on home consoles, codes could be saved onto the device, which is what you were talking about. It came preloaded with a ton of codes for popular games, and you could even hook it up to a computer to load it up with more codes from the internet, which made it really user-friendly, although my personal experience with the software for loading new codes was not successful. I remember trying it with the Game Boy GameShark and having zero luck, which is kind of a bummer. But that contributed to being really popular. It was really user-friendly. And I think you could use a PC to find codes too, using the PC as like a debugging tool, which is pretty neat and probably was a few kids' first foray into software engineering and programming because you get to dive right through all the memory stuff.
My friend was really into that, like going on the PC and looking things up. By the way, the name of that controller, I looked it up and I found it. It is the Brawler 64 by Retro Fighters is the name of the company.
Cool.
And yeah, it says it's like only like $37 on Amazon. So
that's not bad.
Yeah, well, there's a wired and a wireless version, and I think I would personally get the wired because, just old school. You got to keep it old school. So, I don't own it, so I'm not like endorsing it or anything, but it's just like a cool thing, and there's a lot of cool peripherals like that you can find online, and you should definitely look it up if you're into that kind of thing.
Yeah, and we can partially thank Galoob for winning that lawsuit against Nintendo.
Thank you, Galoob.
Potentially. Yeah.
Also, Galoob, just fun to say, really.
It really is, yeah. Interact released a GameShark for the Game Boy, which was hugely popular with Pokemon players because it could be used to catch any Pokemon, even Pokemon not normally available in the version the player had. So you're playing blue version, you want to get something from the red version, like get what Ekans was in the red version, I think, and Mankey that you couldn't find on the blue version. You could get it on your blue version with the GameShark.
That's really cool, actually.
Yeah.
That's a good for the kid with no friends,
Yeah. Yep. Good. You could catch them all. And not have to trade for any of them.
Like GameShark's my friend.
Yeah. They also released them for the Nintendo 64, the PlayStation, and the Saturn, and probably a few other things. The Dreamcast had a GameShark as well. It's a little bit hard to find specific information on some of the stuff from this time period, though. The cartridge-based systems used the traditional Tower of Power style of cheat device insertion, while the Saturn edition used the extra memory port kind of cartridge slot that the Saturn had. I guess you could boot it up off of that cartridge slot and run a game. The PlayStation version included a piece of hardware that plugged into the parallel port on the back of a fat PlayStation, like some of the original run had parallel ports on them. And I don't think either the Saturn or the PlayStation version required any kind of boot disk if you had the hardware thing, which is pretty neat. I thought
they got
for
around
years
that. That's cool.
Yeah. I had assumed for years that a boot disk was just required for all of these things on disc-based consoles, but I was wrong. But in addition to the parallel port PlayStation GameShark, Interact also released the GameShark Cdx, which did include a boot disk and a specialized memory card. So the player would boot the disk, pick out the codes they wanted to use, and then insert the disk of the game they wanted to play. Once that game booted, the codes would activate, and now you're a cheater, Harry, which is what I wrote in my notes, and I don't know if it worked when I said it.
I think it was great execution,
Thanks. You're a cheater, Harry.
That was way more than the first one, and I think it was great.
Thanks. There was also a version of the CDX that worked for the Dreamcast, too. I'm not sure what the memory card did, because most versions of that memory card you couldn't actually use as a memory card. So it was a hardware thing that the codes were somehow saved onto, and then the game was launched, but I don't know how the codes got off of that device into memory. Like, I don't know why it was required. I would assume that the memory addresses could be modified by the disk without the need for the hardware memory thing. If there's somebody out there who knows exactly how that worked, like on a technical level, I would love to hear it, because that seems like a vulnerability in the PlayStation that maybe hasn't been exploited until very recently. I know there are some memory card exploits you can do now, like 30 years after the PlayStation came out, but I would be surprised if it was Dell that figured them out in the 90s and never shared them with anybody, or nobody else found them sooner.
What I miss about old memory cards was the concept of blocks. How many blocks of memory something took up, and I remember PlayStation being all about those blocks. So
yeah,
thank
and then
you
in
for letting me
PlayStation 2,
that.
they went to kilobytes and used normal computer terms. Although the Xbox used blocks, the original Xbox.
Oh, I love me some block measurements. Okay.
Yeah. So, basically, like I said earlier, during this period of time, the GameShark was just a rebranded version of Dell's Action Replay products. Usually in the US, it would be GameShark, and then in Europe, it would be Action Replay, although both products sometimes crossed over. There's a whole lot of different variations during this time. Often other versions would be made for like specific console variations, or would include more features like the ability to search for and find codes yourself, or use a computer to help you find codes. And this sort of setup bled over into the next generation of consoles. So the PlayStation 2 had a few different versions of the GameShark that worked in a lot of the same ways as they did as the original PlayStation, the disc versions. There were no, as far as I know, there was no like USB hardware GameShark for PlayStation 2. But Detail also released action replays for the GameCube and Xbox. Another thing that this generation of cheat devices had was the ability to download save files from the internet, which you could already do with some of them by hooking it up to a computer and like transferring the things over. But because the PS2 and the Xbox could go online themselves, you could download those codes straight from the internet without having to use a computer, which is pretty cool and especially useful on the Xbox because it allowed enterprising young hackers the ability to download hacked save files for games like 007 Agent Under Fire, Splinter Cell, and Mech Assault for modifying their Xbox without a mod chip, which was pretty cool because a lot of the action replay memory cards would include a USB plug. You could USB it to your computer and download save files. So you could download your hacked save files from your computer and play them on your Xbox. And that's how many people modified their original Xboxes, including myself. I bought one of those action replays for that exact reason.
Do you think these are available? Like, it would be cool to have an old action replay anyway for like a GameCube or Xbox or PlayStation 2. I think.
You can find them on eBay and stuff, and they're not. I don't think they're that expensive.
Nice. I'm gonna look around.
Yeah. So yeah, you could download them on your computer, or you could download them on the console. I think. I would assume that to be a case. That would be a pretty killer feature to be able to download stuff from the internet. But maybe it didn't exist on the console itself. But that's kind of where those cheat devices ended up. They continued to work mostly the same. On the Xbox, they weren't as necessary, especially if you had your box modified already. You could download cheat codes for games and not need a device to run them if your Xbox was modified, which was pretty cool. They were called trainers, which is a really old term for this kind of thing that goes way back to the 80s. But it works the same way by modifying those values in memory and giving you cool stuff like infinite lives or whatever. So that's kind of where they ended up, though. So like, where are they now? Within the 7th generation of consoles, the 360 and the PlayStation 3 era, they became basically non-existent. They just dropped off the face of the earth, and this is for a couple of different reasons. One of them being it became harder and harder to run non-approved code on game consoles during this time. So while Sega had approved the Game Genie for the Genesis, no other manufacturer ever approved these things. So they were often running, if they were running on a PlayStation or Dreamcast or something, they were utilizing some method of running that was not sanctioned by the console manufacturer. And so those things would get, those vulnerabilities got patched up in the 360 and PS3 era, and there was a lot of incentive for Microsoft and Sony specifically to keep people from running modified code on their Xboxes and PlayStations because it would enable cheating online, which was a big deal during the 360 and PlayStation 3 era. Once you get online, cheating isn't just about making the game more fun for you, it's about making the game not fun for other people that you're playing with, which is a big bummer. And I'm kind of glad that they died out for that reason. And that it became basically impossible to run unapproved code without massive user-unfriendly workarounds. I'm not saying cheating didn't exist in those times. You could definitely install a mod chip if you wanted to open up your Xbox or PlayStation and do some soldering, and like there's a whole technical process to it. You could still do it, but it became a lot harder for like Detail or Interact to just sell a GameShark for the Xbox 360 that worked the same way because they were just blocked by Microsoft and Sony from doing that kind of stuff.
I never even thought about the fact that, you don't want GameSharks in that generation because online. Like, I never even thought about it. I was sitting here thinking this whole time, like, why did they stop the GameShark? And that is 100% why. Yeah, that's really
totally it. And
is there anything more lame than cheating on online games? It's pretty lame.
It's super lame. And another reason was because these devices, often as a side effect, they weren't explicitly made, or at least not explicitly marketed with this in mind. Oftentimes as a side effect, they made it a lot easier to run pirated games. Sort of hearkening back to those original action replays where you could basically pirate games with them. They would, because they were launching the software themselves, like the PlayStation disc that you wanted to play or something like that, they didn't do as many checks on that software as Nintendo probably would have liked them to do. And so it was a lot easier to get around copy protection by just booting up the action replay first and then popping in your burned game and just running the burned game from the action replay. And so that's also another reason why why Sony and Microsoft got real big into keeping these things from running, because it would also curb piracy. There was an action replay released for the Wii, and the DS. And I think the 3DS has one of those, has one, but I think it's mostly just for getting like hacked save files and less for like actually modifying the game itself. But basically these days, if you find something called an action replay or a GameShark, it's some sort of form of like getting save files from the internet or hacked save files with things on them, which is not nearly as fun. And also you can just download save files from the internet if you want to. So
yeah, I
you
did
don't
that
really
one
need
time,
a device to do it.
being like, I'm just going to download the save file. It was like Morrowind or something out of curiosity. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
well, they've done everything for me. It's not even, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's like, there's nothing else to do.
And it was just like, oh, the game is done. I guess I don't have to play this game because it's done now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which, yeah. So, yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the legacy of these devices before we move on to some emails, though. They existed for years, and then they just disappeared overnight. But what effect did they have on the gaming industry? I think their most immediate impact on the gaming industry while they were in existence was just by breathing new life into games that might have grown bored with over time, you know? Being able to blast through a Mario game or catch any Pokemon I wanted and give it like any move I wanted was pretty cool and made me play those games like way more than I would have. Like normally you get tired of a game, you put it away. But if you fire it up and you got some cheat codes that give you all the power-ups all the time or something like that, that can make it a lot more fun to play through again, or even beat it. If it was a game you'd never beaten before, you could give yourself a little boost and kind of get through the rest of the game, which was pretty cool. And since those games were all single player or at least only locally multiplayer, it was all just good fun. You weren't ruining the game for anybody else by doing that. But these days, though, like everything is online. Like even Pokemon, I'd feel weird about cheating in because you can take those hacked Pokemon online and battle and trade them, and that kind of cheapens the whole experience, I think, a little bit. But the longer-reaching legacy of these cheating devices is not something that they spawned themselves, but they contributed a lot to the idea of modding video games. Video game mods have existed as long as games have. But I think that's what the spirit of the Game Genie lives on in, is in-game mods. So when a game becomes old and stale, you find a mod for it. Like Skyrim makes it more fun. It keeps you playing that same old game for a few more hours. Minecraft has a ton of mods. Fallout, like a lot of Bethesda games, have big modding communities. And they can make it fun to go back to an old game in the same way that cheat codes would make it fun to go back to an old game. And mods are even cooler because they can actually add content and change things. And it's much more wholesome than cheating, you know? And I think modders are creating new content, ways to play these games, and they can do a lot more than a Game Genie ever could. And that's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Yeah. So you said your experience with the GameShark was in Alaska. Your buddy would bring his over?
Yeah, my buddy would bring us over. We'd play like Perfect Dark, all these games. I mean, it's funny though, because in retrospect, a lot of those games had built-in cheats too, but the GameShark was just like a fun way to do it, you know? I think there was there a Need for Speed game on N64? There might have been. It was some car game. I can't remember what it was called, but we used the GameShark on that a lot because it unlocked all sorts of crazy stuff that made the car game even more fun to do and play. And like, I have good memories of GameShark. I never used the Game Genies though, which makes me think I should try to get one, you know? It'd be fun for those older. I need to get one of those older consoles because I've wanted to have a Super Nintendo for so long, and I've never bought one or found one really that I think is in good enough shape that would warrant it. And like, if I got one, I would want to get a Game Genie for sure.
Definitely. I've still got my old Super Nintendo Game Genie. My Game Boy one, I think I lost at some point during a move or something, but I definitely still have my Super Nintendo Game Genie.
You can't get rid of that stuff, you know? Like, I'm never selling my copy of Pokemon Red. Why would I ever do that? Never going to do that. Oh, man. But this is great. It's really interesting that these did fall out, but yeah, without it, we wouldn't have mods. Or I also think, like, hardware mods, like hacking or modding a Xbox 360. Like, that's probably what led to that even more. So, because there were no cheat devices that told people
and I
not
bet
to.
the people who are putting mod chips in their 360 these days are the people who were using Game Genies back in the day, which I am one of those people. I have a mod chip in my 360, and I used a Game Genie back in the day. So, talking about the 360 like it's a recent console. It's like 3 generations behind now, but it's new to me, dang it.
Yeah, we still love it. That's right.
Yeah. So that's it. That's all I got for cheating devices. There's a lot of stuff I left out probably. There's a bunch of different cheating devices, tons of different brands, tons of different things. There's no way to cover them all, but they all kind of worked in a similar way. If you know of something that worked in a completely different way or a novel way, let us know. Send us an email at codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com because I would love to hear about your game cheating stories. But Mike, what you been playing?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. This week's been interesting because I was gone on vacation. I went to a cabin with some friends, but my friends brought fun games. The first one is a board game that's one of the oldest board games. It's called It's UR. It's like if Sorry was a racing board game. Like you have to go out the board. It's a very simple game. You just roll dice and you move it, and it's a board game, which I know we don't normally cover, but it was very fun. And it got very intense for as simple as the game was. And you can find boards. It's just, UR, if you just Google it. Like people sell them on Etsy. It's like a very nerdy board gaming comeback, but this game was played in like ancient Mesopotamia. It's so old. And they found boards.
Dang.
Yeah, and they actually found like a rule book that was like homebrew rules that someone had written, like house rules for because it's the basic rules that we played, but there's also, I guess, like house rules that they found in like a tomb somewhere in ancient Mesopotamia.
I bet house rules were really important way back in the day because like there was no central location of where the rules of a game could be, so the game's rules would change based on how different groups played them.
Yeah, it's like in college.
The version of the game being played in one area versus the version being played 10 miles away might be completely different.
Dude, if I had, like, every time I went to a college party, it was like, okay, what are your guys' beer pong rules? Like, it was on every single house had different beer pong rules, and it was so frustrating to keep up. And you'd go to a place and you'd read the rules and you'd be like, I don't want to play this version. Like, this isn't fun. Just like, what do you mean only? Like, bouncing instantly ends the game? Get out of here. What is this? But yeah, like, so that was really cool. I played that. But also, in a more video game style, my friend, she brought her Oculus Quest 2. Ooh. And I have not really played a lot of VR in my life. I played it really bits and pieces. But I finally got to, I played Beat Saber for the first time, which was super fun. And I did the KDA Pop Stars song.
Yeah.
It was really fun. And then I also played the game called Pistol Whip, which is like very much a Matrixy style, a lot like Super Hot, where you like dodge the bullets and then you like move. But I was impressed. It felt so good. I was like, you know, when you like play a game and you like have this, like, I'm converted, like I'm going to go buy this tomorrow. And then you go to bed and you're like, wait a second, like I have way too many video game systems. It was like that. I was like, I want to get one now. And then I'm like, no, hold up. You have so many gaming systems. But it was really fun and it was really cool. Like the audio sounds great, even though you're not wearing headphones. Like the Oculus Quest 2 is a very good VR device, and I think that if you've played, I'm sure if you play one, you've enjoyed it. I was blown away by it, especially since like Virtual Boy is what I remember before. So it's really fun weekend though. But yeah, those are the games I played. But what did you play this week?
Really not a lot. I also went on a vacation, went back home to see my parents. Haven't seen them in a long time. I did take my little handheld PC and I played a little bit of Persona 5 Strikers on the plane, and
nice.
In when I had some downtime, but most of my time was just spent hanging out with my family and seeing some people I haven't seen in a long time. So that was a lot of fun, but I haven't really played a lot of games. So sorry to be so boring. I'm kind of in a little bit of a game slump right now where I'm just doing other things instead. And I'll come back. I always come back. I'm really tempted to fire up Final Fantasy 14 again. A lot of people in my old playing group of that are back on the Final Fantasy 14 train, so I want to finish Persona before I get back into another MMO, I think.
I get that. I am still working, like I haven't played it this week really at all because I've been gone, but I plan on going back into Mass Effect Andromeda this week.
Yeah.
To try to
We've been playing some Mass Effect. We did another session with you and another buddy of ours. We're just kind of playing through. I just stream it on Discord to Mike and another friend of ours, and we just have a good time hanging out and playing Mass Effect.
And we be renegades.
Yeah, renegades.
If Rex, I don't. This is kind of a major spoiler. Is it? I don't know.
I mean, game's pretty old.
Spoilers. If Rex dies in our playthrough, I'm going to be so sad because
I kind of want to try to keep him alive.
I want to be like Rex Shepard. I want to do that over and over again.
Yeah.
It's my favorite thing. All right. But yeah, it's been a good... Yeah, I'm going to play more games this week, so I am excited for that. I'm also done with my class, so I'm very excited for that. So my Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays are back. Yeah. So, but yeah, we got some new... Well, we got reviews and we got emails. Let's do emails first.
Let's do emails, yeah.
So do you want me to read the first email here from
Sure.
Raphael? All right. It's from Raphael in Brazil. Hi, Mike and Tyler. Nice to hear about your interest in doing an episode with international experiences. I think it would be awesome if you guys are interested in my experiences. My body is ready. Good to know, Raphael. About the last episode's last generation console ranking. Here we go. I'm ready for it. I think you guys shouldn't include the Switch in the same generation as PS4 and Xbox One. I know that Switch is more closely related to PS4 and Xbox One graphically speaking, but I think that Switch belongs to the PS5 and Xbox Series generation due to its release year and technology, I guess. Considering the success that Switch has had in it since its release, it'll probably be the winner of this generation, considering the PS5 and Xbox Series X didn't innovate as much as Nintendo did. Having only a Wii U, a PS4, and the infamous Xbox One in the competition, I totally agree with Tyler. There it is. I knew it was coming. Okay.
Yes.
If I could only pick one of those consoles, it would probably be the PS4. During the last generation, I was all about the Xbox. I got my one back in 2013, and I wasn't interested in any PS4 games at all. Then I got my PS5 last year. I don't know why I haven't played those PS4 games before. I just platinumed Miles Morales and Spider-Man Remastered, played a lot of Ratchet and Clank, and I just started to play Horizon Zero Dawn. Those games, wow, they're beautiful. I'm not influencing a stupid flame war here. I know a Switch and a Series S as well, or I own a Switch and a Series S as well, but my Switch is basically used to play New Horizons since Switch games here usually cost an arm and a leg. And my Xbox is used to play some old games on Game Pass, which, by the way, is an awesome service.
Yeah, it is.
It really is, which is why I understand. I think it obviously, if you're talking about sales, PS4 beats Xbox, but the innovation of that service, I think that service is going to change gaming, and that's why I think you're right. Hyped on it. Okay, so this email continues about this last section on gaming prices. How do you guys feel about the game prices going up over there? Here, a standard $70 game can be converted to 360 of our currency. Named real being he, like a helicopter, and owl, like an owl. So he owl.
Oh, real.
Real.
Okay, real. The Brazilian real.
But I mean, he's saying helicopter. So hell, like a helicopter, and owl. So hey owl. Wow, we're really bad at pronouncing things. Okay, we should have practiced this beforehand. Sorry, Raphael, for just butchering that. Which is 1/3 of our minimum wage. Whoa. So 360 is 1/3 of their minimum wage. I remember that games used to be way cheaper here back in 2013, but even then, the prices were something close to 1/5 of our minimum wage. Again, ouch. I'm looking forward to your next episodes. Thank you for the awesome content. Hope you guys have a great vacation. Thank you. Kind regards, Raphael. Thank you, Raphael. We really got to cover. The thing about this gaming in other countries thing is I'm like, is that our responsibility to cover that? I feel like it'd be weird, you know?
I don't know. We should talk to some people in other places.
Yeah,
I don't know if we should cover it, but we can facilitate a discussion.
We can facilitate. That's good. We'll be the moderators because we don't know anything. But Raphael would be great to talk to about it because he could tell us how to pronounce that without us sounding like idiots, which is good.
Yeah,
which is very good. Thank you for the email, Raphael. And yeah, I game prices going up. It's weird. I really liked when games were going multiplayer only. They'd realize it and sell it for like 40. You know?
Yeah.
Because 60 and 70, what's going to happen, I think, and based entirely off of my own experience, is that when a game's like $70 or $80, I just don't buy it right away. I just sit on it and just wait. So yeah. I think the game, hopefully the companies will see, yeah, our pre-orders are dropping, our launch day sales are dropping, and they'll adjust to the consumer. We'll see, but we can only hope that. But I only really buy games new when I really, really want it.
Yeah,
so,
I think the wait and see approach is the way to go. There's a subreddit called Patient Gamers that is really good. You can get games really cheap if you're willing to wait just a little bit of time for it, especially if you play on PC. But as a I am a person who works in the gaming industry, so I'm a little bit biased, but it costs a lot to make a video game. Like the price of making games has gone up substantially, and the price of the games themselves didn't go up for a couple of generations, and so margins are a lot thinner. So I don't necessarily hate that games are $70 brand new. If people want to pay that much for them when they first come out, that's fine. If they want to wait for them to come down, I think that's also fine. But I'm not inherently mad about the price of games going up because I know how much they cost to make, and they are very expensive to make.
Yeah, definitely. I understand that, which is why I think it's like, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to complain, but I'll wait.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think that's totally fine.
You got to do what's in your budget. Do you want to read Joe's email?
Sure. Well, before we get off of Raphael's here, I want to address that I think the Switch belongs in the 8th generation. It's sort of an 8.5 because of how late it came out. But I think that a true 9th generation Nintendo console is sooner than we think. I know there's a lot of rumors flying around about a Switch Pro or something like that. But it's been 4 years since the Switch came out, and it's usually about 5 or 6 years before like a new generation starts. So I would still call the Switch an 8th generation console, and whatever Nintendo puts out in a year or two will be the 9th generation console. That's what I think.
All righty. You heard it here first, folks. Tyler, hard stance.
Yeah.
Switch,
especially because I consider the Wii U to be in the 8th generation of consoles along with the PS4 and Xbox One. And so it's weird to think of Nintendo as having released 2 consoles in the same generation. That's strange to me.
Yeah, I can see that. All right.
Okay, we got an email here from Joe from San Diego. Joe says, "Gentlemen, E3 is here," unless you're reading this afterwards. "Do you guys think an episode on the history of E3 is possible? Is there even enough history beyond games got more and more popular, so E3 got bigger and bigger? So for E3, what games are you guys looking forward to hearing more about, and do you guys have any predictions or hopes? If you are reading this after E3 2021, then just pretend it's for E3 2022. I just started listening to you guys about a month ago and have learned so much. Thanks for keeping it entertaining and educational. Thanks for being awesome. Joe from San Diego."
Oh, I think an E3 episode is very possible, especially if we did like famous moments from E3.
Yeah, I feel like we did an E3 episode, or we've talked about E3.
It was mentioned a couple times in Ultimate History of Video Games, like the very, very first one and how it was formed. And we've talked about it a little bit, but I don't remember us doing a whole episode to it, calling that much attention. I do think it's a good idea, but it would have to be something very specific, like moments of E3 or console announcements at E3, something that would because like Joe said, it's hard to be like, yeah, games would get bigger, E3 gets bigger. It's just the world's changing. But as far as E3 predictions and hopes go, I am very excited to see if there's something released about Starfield this year, because it's one of those like rumor games I've been hearing so much about. And I really, really want to know what it's all about. If it's just going to be Fallout in space, which is fine. If it was Fallout in space, I'm here for it. I'm fine for that too.
I'm down.
So, but that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, I think Nintendo is gonna announce a Switch upgrade. I think there's too many Switch Pro rumors for that to not have some sort of legs behind it, and I think E3 is the place to do that. I'm hoping that we'll hear more about Breath of the Wild 2 there, and I'm hoping to hear something about another Persona sequel, maybe a Persona 6. Fingers crossed. I would totally love to hear that.
My one hope would be if there is a Switch Pro or whatever, and Breath of the Wild 2, that I could still play Breath of the Wild 2 on my old Switch. I really don't want to have to buy a new one.
I think it'll be like the new Nintendo 3DS, where it was like an upgraded 3DS that was a little bit faster and sort of ran things at a higher frame rate, but I think there was only a couple of games that actually required it.
Good, because I just love my Nintendo Switch. I love it so much.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to picking up a Switch Pro if it's got enough cool things. Like if it's got 4K output, and that 4K output like is sort of like works across older games, or at least enough of the older games to make it worth it. I'm not opposed. I think that could be fun.
Nice. Well, thank you for the email, Joe.
Yeah.
Some good questions. I'll put the E3 thing on the list. That sounds good.
Okay.
So we got a couple new reviews. You want me to read these real quick?
Sure.
All right. So here, man, you think I would be more prepared for this moment when we do this, and every time I am very much not. It's because I have to keep my phone off while we record so I don't get terrible interference, It's what it's all about. But we got 2 new reviews, so we're actually at 112 22 now, which is pretty crazy. Wow. First one is from Pearson71. Exactly what I was looking for. 5 stars. I searched for video game history, and it's exactly what I was hoping to find. Instead of looking forward to upcoming games, I find more satisfactory in learning about and playing all the games I missed or had played growing up. It's exciting to discover the shared appreciation. Thank you, Pearson. Appreciate it. Pearson71. All right, this one's from Gray Wolves. Gray_Wolves. 5 stars. So good. I absolutely love this podcast. I'm only on episode 7, but it's been clear from the very first show how good these two are. The show is well produced, the content is presented in a fascinating way, and both these guys are really funny. Thank you. I find myself chuckling a lot, even when I don't know exactly what they're talking about. That's good. Sometimes we don't either. I'm not even huge into video games, but these two have really educated me and deepened my interest in the medium. Keep up the awesome work. Thank you, Gray_Wolves. You have to say the underscore? It sounds right to me.
Yeah, I think you do.
You do. All right. Well, if you want to send us a review, we love it. That's really helpful. Also, if you want to send us an email, codexhistorypodcast@gmail.com, like Tyler mentioned before. And lastly, we do have a Discord server. It's pretty fun. We talk about food and people's adorable pets. We share memes, have hot takes. It's a good time. If you want to join that, you can either email us or you can go to my Twitter @mecoletta, MECOLETTA, and click on the pinned post at the very top, which is just the Discord link that never expires, the invite. So you can click on that. Also, Tyler's on Twitter @SneakerElf, ELPH, if you want to talk to him. If you know about cheating devices and how other weird ones work, you should share that with him. But with that, I think that's it for the day. This was a great episode, Tyler. I was super excited to be surprised by cheat devices. This is fun.
Yeah.
So thank you all so much for listening. And do you want to say bye to everybody, Tyler?
Goodbye, everybody.